I used to think silence meant peace. Something you grow into. Something you earn. But after Zach left, it became something else entirely. Something that scraped against the inside of my ribs like a dull blade. At first, I gave him space. A few days. Then a week. Then 2. I figured he'd cool off, do his usual retreat into his thoughts thing, and come home when he was ready to talk. We'd done this before. He'd shut down, go silent, disappear into a project or a long walk, and then one morning I'd find a coffee waiting for me on the counter and his keys tossed in the bowl like nothing happened. This time was different. I could feel it in the way the bed stayed cold. In the way the silence didn't stretch, it settled. Like dust on top of something dead. The first week, I kept myself busy. Cleaned the kitchen like it would make him walk through the door again. Washed his favorite hoodie. Folded it. Set it on the edge of the couch where he used to sit with that stupid YouTube podcast humming in the background. I even went to the farmer's market and bought that weird plum jam he always swore tasted like childhood. Even though we both grew up in concrete neighborhoods nowhere near a plum tree. The second week, the energy shifted. Or maybe I just started noticing how quiet everything actually was. No one reminded me the tires needed rotating. No one asked if I wanted the last bite. No one stole my charger or left beard trimmings in the sink. The little annoyances I once swore would drive me crazy were gone. And it made everything worse. I tried texting. Short things. Hope you're okay. Let me know if you need anything. Can we talk? The messages stayed unread. Then I stopped pretending and called. Straight to voicemail. No ring. Just that robotic voice that made me want to scream. By week 3, I'd officially crossed into pathetic. I'd go through old photos like they held clues. Like if I zoomed in enough, I'd see a timestamp, a hidden message, a warning sign I missed. I even found myself looking through his playlists, trying to decode what kind of headspace he was in when he left. Stupid, I know, but when someone ghosts you in your own life, you start searching for anything that might tether you back to them. I told myself I'd wait. Give him time. Give us time. But time's a liar. It doesn't heal. It just hardens things. Eventually, I broke. I called Clay. Now, Clay and I were never exactly tight. He's Zach's younger brother by 2 years, the kind of guy who's always halfway between charming and suspicious. He always called me Mel, even though I hated it and he knew it. Still, he answered after one ring. His voice was polite, too polite. He sounded like someone who had been warned not to say too much. I told him I just wanted to talk, that I wasn't looking for drama, just understanding. I said I missed Zach, that I knew I'd screwed up, but I was trying to fix it. I used words like accountability and closure because I thought they sounded adult, like they'd earn me points. Clay didn't buy it. Not entirely. He said Zach was okay, that he'd been staying near Lincoln for a bit, spending time out by the old bike trail. You know the one, he added, like I didn't, like I hadn't once tripped on a tree root there and watched Zach laugh so hard he nearly dropped his camera. Clay said Zach was happy. That word gutted me more than I expected. Because happy meant something different than getting by, or taking space, or healing. Happy meant free. Still, I nodded like he could see me. Thanked him. Hung up. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my own reflection like it might have answers. I looked like hell. The kind of hell you don't notice until you catch your own eyes in the mirror and realize you haven't really slept in weeks. The kind of hell where your hair lives in a bun and the takeout boxes pile up on the counter like a to-do list you'll never touch. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stared and whispered the question I'd been avoiding since he left. What if he's better without me? That Saturday, I got in my car and drove to Lincoln. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't even pack a bag. Just threw on some jeans and a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and left the house like I was running from a fire no one else could see. The drive was quiet. I kept the radio off. I didn't want noise. I just kept rehearsing in my head what I'd say, how I'd say it. I went through versions of apologies like they were drafts of a speech I didn't know how to finish. I didn't mean it. It was a joke. I was frustrated. You weren't supposed to hear it. You were supposed to hear it. It all sounded weak. But I figured I'd know what to say when I saw him. Lincoln was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe just smaller without him beside me. The trees looked more brittle. the air thinner. The path to the trailhead was still gravelly, still lined with those splintering wooden benches he used to complain about every time we stopped for water. And then I saw him, across the street from the trailhead, sitting outside a tiny cafe I didn't even remember being there before. He was holding a chipped mug with both hands, leaning back slightly, shoulders relaxed like someone who'd finally figured out how to breathe. He wasn't alone. There was a woman next to him, red hair pulled into a high ponytail, wearing jogging gear and laughing like the world had stopped just to hear her. Her hand brushed his forearm as she said something, and he leaned in, smiling in that quiet, half-mouthed way he used to save for private jokes. I froze. It wasn't jealousy. Not yet. It was something colder, something sharp, a realization. He looked present, like someone who wasn't waiting on anyone, like someone who didn't need saving. The man I once lived beside felt like someone entirely new, someone who had let go of the version of himself I had come to expect, someone who had boundaries now, stillness, peace. He didn't see me, and I didn't approach him. Not that time. I just stood there long enough to memorize his smile. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat until my hands stopped shaking. I didn't start the engine for a while. Didn't cry either. But something in me shifted. Not grief. Not yet. But something was beginning to break. I waited a week before I drove back. Told myself I wasn't going there for him. But that was a lie so thin even I couldn't swallow it. Truth was, I couldn't shake the image of him on that cafe patio, sunlight in his hair, laughing like I'd never touched his life at all. I told myself I wasn't ready the first time, that I hadn't come prepared, that I needed a real apology, something worthy of the years we spent together. So I made a plan. I found an old photo of us hiking that same trail, me half covered in sweat, Zach beaming like I just climbed Everest instead of a mildly steep hill. I printed it and wrote something on the back. I should have told you back then. You carried us farther than I ever gave you credit for. I didn't sign it, just folded it up and slipped it into my glove compartment like a note to a ghost I was hoping to conjure. Saturday came again and I drove. This time I dressed with intention. Not fancy, not desperate, just open. Like I was trying to say with my clothes what my voice never managed to. I get it now. Every mile out of the city felt heavier, like I was being pulled backward through all the things I hadn't said, all the ways I'd laughed too hard at his expense, all the times I'd let frustration turn into cruelty and called it sarcasm. When I pulled into Lincoln, the streets were quieter than the week before. There was a chill in the air, and the trees had started to change. Bright veins of orange running through the green. I parked across from the cafe and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel like it might give me strength. He wasn't there. I checked the time. 10:37 a.m. Maybe he was running late. Maybe they were on the trail already. I debated waiting. I debated leaving. What was I hoping for? That he'd see me across the street, come rushing over, take my face in his hands and say, "God, I've been waiting for you to show up?" That wasn't Zach. He was never the one who ran. He just walked. And if you didn't walk beside him, he didn't stop to look back. I got out anyway, walked into the cafe, ordered the same black coffee he always liked, even though I couldn't stand the stuff. I sat by the window and waited. The red-haired woman came in around 11. Alone. She ordered a chai latte, paid with her phone, then walked out without so much as a glance around the place. No sign of Zach. I wanted to ask the barista if she came here often, if they ever saw her with someone. But I didn't. I had some dignity left, even if it was buried under a few layers of pathetic. Instead, I left the photo on the corner of the table. Maybe he'd see it if he came in later. Maybe he'd pick it up, read the back, and know it was from me. Or maybe someone would toss it in the trash with the rest of the day's napkins. Either way, I tried. It was more than he could say. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the humming silence that had become my only constant. I kept checking my phone. For what? A call? A text? A single damn period from Zach to tell me he'd seen the note? Nothing. The next morning, I opened Facebook. I hadn't been on in weeks. Not since people started commenting weird little thinking of you messages on posts I'd made with Zach like we died in a car crash instead of just falling apart slowly. But I was desperate. I searched for June. June was one of those float-in, float-out friends. We all had them, part of the same college crowd, drifted over time, but still liked each other's posts out of habit. She'd known both of us back in the early days, when we were inseparable and made a game out of who could roast the other better. June used to joke we'd either be divorced by 30 or the old couple heckling people in retirement homes. I guess she wasn't entirely wrong. I messaged her. Said I was reaching out because I didn't know who else to talk to. Said I wasn't looking for gossip or sides. That I missed Zach. That I knew I messed up. That I didn't even want him back if he didn't want me. But I needed to know if he was okay. That maybe, if he heard from someone else, he'd be willing to listen. I told her about the cafe, the trail, the way he looked that first time I saw him again. I told her everything except how alone I was. How small the house felt without his laughter echoing off the walls. She responded 2 hours later. Said she was sorry to hear what had happened. That she hadn't talked to Zach in years. But she'd see what she could do. I knew that was probably just something people said. But it still gave me a flicker of something. Hope, maybe. Or at least distraction. The next day, I got nothing. Then the day after that. Then a week. And I knew. She'd reached out. He'd told her to back off. And she had. The silence grew thicker. Not heavier, just more final. Then came the message. It wasn't a text. It wasn't even from a number I recognized. It was an email. No subject line. No sender name. Just a single attachment, a photo. Zach. Standing on the edge of the lake trail in Lincoln. Dressed in his usual flannel and jeans, arms loose at his sides. His face looked soft, but not tired. Not like before. The sun was behind him, cutting gold lines through the sky and lighting up the hair of the woman next to him. The redhead. Her head tilted slightly toward him. His arm draped across her shoulders in a way that looked casual. Int asterisk mate. Like it had always been there. Beneath the image, a single line. Sometimes, distance is the only way to understand who you were never meant to be. No name. No punctuation. Just that. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just stared at the screen, feeling something deep inside me unravel. Because up until that moment, there was still a part of me that believed he was waiting. That all the silence, all the distance, was just him holding back until I said the magic words. But now I knew. He was never coming back. I wish I could say I moved on right away. That the message hit me like a slap, woke me up and I started rebuilding. But that's not what happened. What happened was smaller, quieter. A slow bleed of understanding instead of a single clean cut. For days, I kept the photo open on my phone like some kind of masochist, as if looking at it over and over would make it mean something else. As if the way his fingers curved over her shoulder didn't say everything I didn't want to hear. I even saved the image to a hidden folder like it was contraband, like acknowledging what I saw made it worse. I stopped going to the cafe after that. There wasn't a point. He wasn't hiding. He just wasn't looking for me. He'd said what he needed to say with one sentence, one image. And I got the message. But understanding doesn't make it hurt less. The house stayed clean, but not in the way it used to. Back then, it was Zach who quietly tidied up, fixed the cabinet hinge when it squeaked, ran the dishwasher before I noticed the sink was full. Now, it stayed clean because I wasn't living in it, not really. I ate standing up, drank my coffee without tasting it. I sat on the couch with the TV on mute, just so something would move in the room. I didn't cry much. I thought I would. I wanted to. But grief has a strange way of drying up when it becomes routine. I missed his presence more than his words. I missed the way he breathed when he read. I missed how he always set the bathroom mirror just a little too low, and how he'd apologize when I asked him to raise it, even though we both knew I could just tilt my head. Friends stopped asking about him. At first, it was polite concern. Any updates? And, have you heard from Zach? Then it turned into cautious avoidance, like they were afraid saying his name would break me. Eventually, the questions stopped altogether. And I don't know what was worse, the people who sided with him quietly cutting me out of their lives, or the ones who pretended nothing had changed. Every Friday night, I almost called him. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering over his name. But what would I say? That I missed the way he folded my sweaters so neatly I used to mess them up just to have him fix them again? That I never actually figured out how to refill the lawnmower gas? That when I said he was only good for cleaning, I didn't mean it? That it was a joke that wasn't funny? That I laughed too hard at the wrong moment, and by the time I realized the damage, he'd already started disappearing? But you can't unsay something when it's the thing that finally made someone believe the worst about themselves. You can't walk it back after it confirms every quiet doubt they've ever had. So I stayed silent. The world didn't fall apart, but it stopped making sense. And that might be worse. 2 months after the message, I saw him again. I wasn't looking for him, I swear. I was at a Target off Highway 22, running errands. Batteries, toothpaste, light bulbs, just stupid, mundane things that made me feel like I was still a functioning person. I was walking toward checkout when I glanced up and saw him through the glass storefront, outside in the parking lot. Took me a second to register what I was looking at. He was pushing a cart, the kind with the wobbly front he always hated, and walking beside him was her, the red-haired woman. They were holding hands. She said something and he laughed, really laughed, and leaned in toward her like he couldn't get enough. His shoulders were loose. His face had that softness again. And I realized something in that moment, something that hollowed me out completely. He looked free, not just relaxed, not just happy, free, like someone who had let go of something heavy, like someone who had spent years quietly carrying things and finally set them down. I didn't even recognize the way he moved. It was the same body, the same frame, but it didn't belong to me anymore. Maybe it never did. They didn't see me, and I didn't run out, didn't shout, didn't cry. I just stood there, half hidden behind a row of sale bins filled with dollar-something plastic junk, and I stared. Not out of longing, not even pain exactly. It was understanding. Something brutal but true. He didn't just leave the house. He left my version of him behind. And the man who walked beside her now, that wasn't someone I could reach back for. That wasn't someone I could apologize my way into reclaiming. That man was built out of the space I gave him. Out of the silence I thought was temporary. Out of the little cracks I never patched. I'd wanted him to forgive me so badly. But standing there, I realized forgiveness wasn't something I could ask for. It was something he gave to himself the moment he chose not to come back. I watched until they reached their car, until the hatch closed and they drove off, disappearing into a line of traffic like just another couple doing weekend errands. I paid for my things in silence, drove home in silence, unpacked in silence, and for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like punishment. Felt like the beginning of something else. Not healing exactly, but something close.